Hello there, it's Juliana Michaels and welcome to my channel. I'm so excited to share this mixed media Christmas card project with you today. I'll be using some stamps and stencils from the Stampers Anonymous Tim Holtz Christmas Curations, but I really want you to think about what you have in your own collection because these techniques will work with any of your favorite designs. We'll focus on building a beautiful layered background together, and at the end I'll walk you through how I finished this card, plus give you a couple of alternative ideas to try. Now let's get into it. Now the stamps and stencils that I'm going to be using for this card, it looks like a lot. You do not need all these stamp sets. You don't need these exact stamp sets or stencils. I just want to show you some examples just to give you an idea of what I use so that you can kind of go through your stash and maybe look for something similar. So I'm going to be using this stencil here that is Holiday Script. And then I'm going to be using this stamp stencil set for the sentiment. So just some sort of sentiment stamp set would work. This is THMM132. And I'm going to be using this ticket image off of this stamp set, which is THMM131. I'm also going to be using this little music note stamp. Again, go through your stash to look for maybe something similar. This is from Mini Holidays 4. And then I'm also going to be using Letters to Santa, and specifically this large postcard stamp. So just kind of a hodgepodge of stamps and a stencil to get you started. For the mediums, I'm going to be working with some distress spray stain and old paper and broken china, and then some Spritz and antique linen and broken china. And you could swap these out for whatever kind of sprays that you would like to use. I'm also going to be using some texture paste opaque, so this is the white matte opaque texture paste. I'm also going to be using a little bit of distress ink and vintage photo. For the stamping, I'm going to be using archival ink and black soot, but just some sort of permanent ink will work. And then I'm also going to be doing a little bit with some luster wax from Sizzix in gold, and then I'm going to be adding some splatters with the Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. And as far as the paper goes, as always, I'm going to be working on distress watercolor cardstock. I just recommend some sort of cardstock or paper that can handle wet mediums such as pastes and sprays and stuff. So I'll be working on the smooth side, and I've cut this down to 4 3/4 by 5 3/4 because the finished card is 5 by 7, so then I'll have a matte layer on this that's 5 by 7. And the first thing I'm going to do is do some of the stamping. So I'm just going to go through here and I'm going to grab that little music note stamp, that postcard stamp, and that ticket. If you want to work in a stamping platform, you can. I'm going to do kind of a combination of both here. And as far as the images that I'm stamping, I actually added, when I was working on this, the original card did not have all of the stamping that I ended up with. I ended up adding some of the stamping at the end just to kind of fill in some of like the blank space that was on the background and just to add a little bit of interest. So this is the postcard stamp, and because these don't have the design printed on this side, it's kind of hard sometimes if you're wanting to stamp it straight and have things lined up. So a lot of times I'll just get it in my stamping platform and then just kind of use the grid lines on this to help me get it lined up straight. And then we'll stamp that with the archival ink. And I'm using a permanent ink because I don't want the stamping to bleed at all. And then for this little guy here, I'm going to need to put my foam pad back in there because that's a clear stamp, so it's not as thick. I'm just going to stamp that little ticket down here. So basically just kind of creating a little border down this side here. And usually with the archival ink and watercolor cardstock, you are going to have to ink it up a couple times, even if you've got a freshly inked ink pad, is that watercolor cardstock just kind of soaks it up. All right. Now, at this point, like if you want to leave it in here, you can. I'm going to do some stamping with this little music note stamp, and I'm not going to use a stamping block or my stamping platform this time. I'm just going to kind of rub the ink pad on there just to get a little bit of ink. And then I'm just going to kind of do some kind of freehand stamping just to add a little interest here and there to the background. Not necessarily going for like anything perfect here. So I'm just kind of tapping down here and there, different sections of the stamp, and getting some lighter and darker stamped impressions. There we are. Kind of looks like a hot mess at the moment, but that's all good. Once we start adding the other layers and all that, it's going to kind of take on a new life. So now that we've got the stamping done, we're going to move on to the next layer here, and we're going to add some texture paste. And I've just got my paper being held down here with a sticky mat. And then I'm just going to let's kind of line this stencil up along this edge here. And you know, you can kind of decide, do you want any of it cut off or not? I'm going to just kind of let it overhang just a tiny little bit. And push that down there so that helps hold it in place. And this texture paste is getting a little bit on the dry side, so I need to make sure I use this up here soon. But I'm just scooped out some of that with my palette knife, and then I'm just going to spread that across the background here. And it doesn't have to be a perfect coverage, but I am kind of wanting to try to make sure I get most of this design filled in with the paste. So I'm just going to kind of take my time and apply the paste here and there over the stencil, and then kind of spread it around. If I've missed any spots, add a little bit more if need be. And just the biggest thing when you're doing with the texture paste, if you've got a stencil that's really delicate and loose, you want to make sure that you're putting the paste, kind of applying it in the direction of the stencil so that you don't get paste underneath any of those pieces that are maybe loose and moving around on you. And then you also just want to make sure you don't have too much paste. So if you can't see your stencil design anymore, you probably, like down here, you probably have a little bit too much paste. So just kind of scoop off a little bit of it and move it to another section. It doesn't have to be perfectly smooth, but you just don't want to get it too thick. So that'll also help with the drying time. So kind of speed things up a little bit. And then you're just going to gently peel this up. And then you want to put this in either in like a tray of water to let it soak so you can clean it up later, or you want to go and clean it immediately in your sink because you don't want to have that paste drying on the stencil because it'll ruin it. So I'm going to go clean off my stencil and be back. And you also want to clean off any paste that got onto your sticky mat. You don't want to leave that on there, so you can either just wipe it off or clean it off in the sink as well. And then the great thing about this texture paste, especially the distress texture paste, is that you can dry it with your heat tool if you want. So you can just give that a quick dry. But it doesn't have to be completely dry for this next step. So just a little bit dry, so it's not gonna get damaged if you bump it or anything like that. So a little dry. You can also set this to the side to dry and let it just air dry, and depending on the heat and humidity and all that, temperature, you know, it might take a little longer, be faster or shorter depending on where you live. So, as you can see now, like that stamping that we did already has taken on a totally different look just with that texture paste being added. Now we're going to pull out those sprays, and if you've got your Spritz out, as always, just a reminder to shake them up really well and get all that pigment mixed in that's sitting on the bottom. So that'll help when you spray so that they don't clog. And these are all shaken up now, and you can see that that pigment's all mixed in. It's not, none of it's sitting on the bottom in big chunks or anything like it was. So these are ready to go. I'm going to be doing my spraying here in a splat box. It's just a cardboard box with some paper towels in the bottom to help soak up any of the excess ink. And I am just going to start spraying here. So this is the Broken China Distress Spray Stain. And get a coverage of that on there. And then I'm going to add some of the old paper. So this is going to have a little bit of a greenish tint to it. And mixed in with the Broken China, get a little bit of a greenish brownish color going on. And if you don't like those little speckledy bits here and there, just add a little more water or a little more ink. And then I'm just drying this, so that little dry with the heat tool. Like I said, if you want any, if you want more color of any kind anywhere, just give it another little spritz here and there. Add some more water. Add a little bit more old paper down here. There we go. Oh yeah. And then, yeah, give this a good dry. The paper's gonna warp, that's normal as it's getting wet. So just kind of tap it back and forth and dab off some of that excess ink on the edges. Or you can hold it up and let that ink kind of drip and move around a little bit. And then you can also just let this sit and dry. You don't have to dry it with the heat tool either, but I am usually a little too impatient when it comes to drying things, so I use my heat tool all the time when I can. All right, so at this point you can kind of see, like with the stamping that we did initially, why we wanted to use the permanent ink, because if we had used a water reactive ink and added that paste and then those sprays and the water on top of it, you wouldn't be able to see any of these music notes. You wouldn't be able to see any of this image either. So, or just kind of an explanation as to why I'm using some of the different inks that I'm using here. And another thing you might notice is with the texture paste, how it absorbs the ink that you sprayed on it. It's not a resist, just absorbs whatever color you spray over it. So again, I think that adds a lot of unique interest to the background as that ink kind of pools and colors the paste. All right, so next what we're going to do, we can add some of the Spritz, and this is just adding a little bit light shimmer. It's not going to add a lot of color to it, but I am going to kind of try to spray in kind of the areas where there's a little bit of that color and just give it a light spritz. The antique linen is a lot lighter in color, so it's not going to show up as much, but gives it just a little shimmer here and there. And then give that a quick dry. And you will get these little like splatters. It's not going to give you necessarily this perfectly fine mist of shimmer. You're going to get some splotches and splatters, and that was intentional. Tim Holtz, when he was designing the spray and the type of nozzle that they're using to deliver the spritz, he wanted it to give you that kind of distressed look that he loves. So, and I love it as well. And then you'll notice as the spritz dries that it's going to get a shinier than what it looks like right when you first spray it. So I'm going to get this dry, and let's see if we can hold it up here and see if you all can see that shimmer. Hopefully we're catching a little bit of it here, but in person, if you've used the spritz, you know, like it just adds a beautiful layer of shimmer and shine to the projects. And then another thing with the spritz that I didn't mention, you do want to make sure you wipe off the nozzle when you're done. That'll also kind of help with the clogging. So now we're going to add a little bit more shimmer and shine with the luster wax, and I'm going to use a glove. I always like to use a glove when I'm working with the waxes, and get a little bit of that out onto my finger here, and I'm just going to kind of smooth it out on my craft mat so that I kind of have a more even coverage on my finger. And then I'm just going to lay that kind of flat over the paper, just and very lightly go down and kind of start covering that onto the raised area here that we created with the paste. So I'm just rubbing it over that paste. And then obviously the more you put down, the more that's going to transfer over onto the paper. And just try to go kind of light. You can always add a little bit more. And if you want to put it on some special, like certain areas, especially if you've got a stencil that's got like bigger, flatter sections to it, you can kind of go in and just add it with your fingertip. You could also even use like a Q-tip or something to apply it. And if you've got if your stencil design that you're using is really detailed and there's a lot of blank spaces that don't have texture paste, you're probably going to get a little bit more of this down onto the paper itself, and that's okay. It's still going to add a beautiful effect to things. So there we go. Yes. Okay. And then once you're happy with that, you can kind of see again, it just adds a little little bit vintage flair to things. And then you just clean that up. I would recommend working on a non-porous surface when you're using the wax, because it is permanent once it's dry. So it's going to come off a lot easier on something like a craft mat that's made for, you know, protecting your work surface. And this is just a little bit of rubbing alcohol that can help clean it up as well. So then this will dry pretty quickly. That right now it's going to still like rub off on my hand, but it will dry very quickly and be permanent on your project. All right, so then the final step here, once that's all dry, is I'm just going to take a blending brush and a little bit of Vintage Photo Distress ink and just kind of apply that around the edges here. Kind of working on a little bit of a circular motion, kind of pulling that ink. Kind of start off my craft mat a little bit there and then pull that into the paper. almost forgot, gonna add some splatters, so I'm just gonna pull out some of that bleed-proof white ink. Don't take much. Let's get a little bit on my brush there. And you need to add a little bit of water to it. Just a little drop there. Mix that together. Just get it a little bit more fluid. And then just gonna tap that onto my background here. As little or as much of that as you like. And then we just let that dry and be ready to go. And so as you can see here in the finished card, I embellished it using the Jolly Saint Nick Colorize that I just die cut from various pieces of colored cardstock and assembled it and added it to the card. And then I stamped the sentiment on some black cardstock using white embossing powder, and then just trimmed that down and adhered all of that to the card. And then I layered the background onto a piece of white cardstock, and I inked the edges of that with the same vintage photo. And then the card was ready to go. But feel free to embellish this background however you like, you know, whatever kind of die cuts you might have, or maybe you just have a large Christmas sentiment that would work on here. You'd also make this card smaller if you wanted. I made it this size because the Saint Nick die is quite large when it's fully assembled. So lots of options for you as you're doing your Christmas making. And I hope you enjoyed seeing how this mixed media background came together. You can find links to all of the products I used in the description box below, along with the visual supply list for a quick look at everything. If you enjoyed this video, I'd love it if you gave it a thumbs up and subscribed for more crafty inspiration, tips, and techniques. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss a video. Looking for more Christmas card inspiration? Make sure to check out my Christmas card playlist. Once again, thanks for watching. And until next time, stay crafty, my friend.